Good morning, I'm harleysch from the LaRouche organization with your daily video update for August 7th, 2024. Remember how in 2016 in the Republican primary, Donald Trump decimated the Bush machine and destroyed the campaign of Jeb Bush? This was in the debate before the South Carolina primary. And the question came up that Barbara Bush was in the audience. And Jeb Bush pointed her out and he said, "My mother is one of the strongest people I know." And Trump said, "Well, maybe she should be running for president instead of you." Jeb's face fell flat. And Trump went on to a critique of the Bush machine and the Bush policy in the Republican Party as a war policy, and especially hitting hard at the lies that led to the Iraq War. This was a complete crushing of Jeb Bush, who shortly afterwards had to drop out, and it demonstrated what Trump would then go on to do to Hillary Clinton, who was a representative on the Democratic side of the same war party. The Bushes were defeated, the Clintons were defeated, and this created the potential for an era of peace in the United States. Now, what we're seeing today is a reemergence of that Republican war party, and in particular around the situation in Southwest Asia or the Middle East. And this is a problem that has to be addressed by President Trump. We're seeing the reemergence of Jeb Bush as part of this attempt to fence in Donald Trump into keeping him, in case he should win, keeping him under the control of the warhawks, the military-industrial financial complex. Jeb has reemerged in something called the United Against Nuclear Iran, which has John Bolton, a Trump opponent, on the advisory board. Jeb is the new chairman. And they're calling this United Against Nuclear Iran is calling for the U.S. to bomb Iran in a reflection or an echo of the old John McCain warhawk policy. The CEO of the United Against Nuclear Iran is named Mark Wallace, and he put out a statement the other day praising the force buildup in the region and the importance of the U.S. attacking Iran. He said, quote, "The U.S. must use force to prevent an escalation." In other words, escalate to prevent escalation. And he went on to say, "Failure to do so will lead to the very escalation American leadership seeks to avoid." At the same time, Bolton is pushing for war. Nikki Haley, who ran against Trump in the primaries, is pushing for war. And of course, Mike Pompeo. Now, Pompeo is an interesting case because he's claiming to be speaking for Trump when he writes an op-ed talking about the importance of staying firm in Ukraine against Russia. Pompeo, of course, was one of the people who pushed Trump to launch attacks on Iran during the first Trump administration. Now, is Pompeo speaking for Trump when he says the U.S. must continue to move against Putin and against Xi Jinping and against Iran? Are the warhawks Bolton and Haley and Speaker Johnson, and remember Johnson pushed through the Ukraine funding, are they speaking for Trump when they call for strikes against Iran and escalation in Ukraine? It's really crucial that President Trump clarify this. If they're not speaking for him, he should say so. Unfortunately, he seems to be allowing Biden to keep the United States on the side of the Israelis. And the only way to stop the genocide in Palestine will be to have the United States cut off weapons and arms and money and political and diplomatic support for Israel. So where does Donald Trump stand on that? What we're seeing is a reemergence of the warhawks in the Republican Party after they had been knocked down by Trump in 2016. And they're unifying with the warhawks in the Democratic Party, as we can see in the commitment to funding the wars. Now, we saw that also when Netanyahu addressed the U.S. Congress, and the people who were there, the congressmen who were there, jumped up in wild applause whenever he talked about the United States must join with Israel against Iran in a war. Now, The point is the U.S. military-industrial financial complex wants more wars. And they need these wars to defend and protect their collapsing unipolar order. Now, there's something called the breakaway ally, which was a strategy that was presented by Kissinger, by Paul Wolfowitz, and others, which was that Israel would start the war, that Israel would be the provocateur to start the war, but then the U.S. would be forced to come in to bail out Israel. And this is the way the military-industrial financial complex intends to stay involved in war in Southwest Asia, to stop the emergence of the Silk Road system of the Chinese, the Belt and Road Initiative, from connecting Eurasia through the Middle East with Africa. This is something that the British Empire has always opposed, and the fear of that is what's driving them to support genocide in Palestine and the war in Ukraine, and also to prepare for a war with China. The U.S. could stop the killing in Gaza in a minute. All Biden would have to do, or someone who's speaking for Biden, would be to say no more weapons and no more money if you don't stop this. Now, meanwhile, the U.S. proxy war in Ukraine is continuing on an escalation. Yesterday, the Ukrainians launched an attack into Russia, into the Kursk region. At least 300 soldiers and 30 armored vehicles, backed by artillery and drone strikes, attempted to cross into the Kursk region. They were pushed back by Russian forces. But it led to a statement from the Russian State Duma speaker, Volodin. The Duma is the legislature in Russia. And Volodin made the relevant point after a meeting with President Putin. Here's what Volodin said, quote, "Parliaments and citizens in the U.S. and the European Union should understand that their leaders, that is those who support such attacks, have lost their minds," unquote. And this may, quote, "lead the world to tragic consequences," unquote. This from a top Russian official. And it's clear, these wars threaten to escalate. And this is a moment in August when these wars do escalate, when leaders are on vacation, when the people are paying attention in the Northern Hemisphere to the summer vacation and so on. But there's another aspect of this time, which is that there's a U.S. election coming up. It's an opportunity for the American people to show that the American people are not with the warhawks, that we don't want our trillions of dollars spent on wars against poor countries, that we do not support the kinds of genocidal policies that the Israelis are imposing on the Palestinians. And the American people can use an election period to demand that their leaders do what's in the interests of the people, which is instead of spending wildly on wars, that money should go into infrastructure, into healthcare, into education, the things that the American people really need. And so this is an ideal moment to get behind the global force that's calling for an end to these wars, and instead an opening of an era of mutual benefit through cooperation. That's what I'll be discussing with Helga Zepp-LaRouche today. I'll have a link to our discussion in the description section, and I hope you'll take advantage of that and join us later today.
The big question, what can we do about it? If we have the power to influence the course of history as individuals, then each of us has a corresponding moral responsibility to muster from within ourselves those capacities which enable us to do our part in shaping the course of civilization. Now, under that rubric, I say, what kind of news is newsworthy? The only news that's worth having is news which performs those functions, which enables government, which enables you as an individual and so forth, better to understand what is happening to this planet, to understand what the developments are that are shaping the course of history, and finally to indicate to you the facts which you need to look at so that you can judge what it is that you might be able to do which can contribute to bringing about a solution, an escape from the collapse of civilization. This is no pipe dream, this is no fantasy, this is real.